congratulations on The Paper Tigers. I think it's a very funny, heartfelt film. Great fight scenes. Great mix of comedy, drama, and action. So, for what it's worth, well done.
Thank you so much.
No
Thank you
worries.
for giving
Now,
me the time here to chat, and I'm especially glad you liked it.
okay, well, before we get into the film, though, just quickly, I want you to just give me a very concise bio.
So I am a first generation, I guess Vietnamese American. So my parents are from the generation that immigrated over after the war, and I'm the first of my generation to be born here, here in the States. And so that's been kind of my upbringing and understanding two cultures, but also watching Asian cinema and growing up in that kind of environment, but also watching Hollywood films in the theaters, but then going home and seeing Asian movies on VHS. So that's kind of like the two artistic influences, I would say, growing up. And as time goes by, you're kind of inspired by it. For me, I was particularly deranged and wanted to actually try my hand at filmmaking, especially after watching Jackie Chan and making martial arts films from that and imitating all that the stuff he did and going into film and exploring his influences like Buster Keaton and Gene Kelly and just kind of moving into musicals and silence and just loving movies in general. So that's kind of the nutshell. And then I ended up making more films on my own. I eventually went to Vietnam to work on some films as an editor for some other also Vietnamese emigres who have returned to Vietnam to work on films. And but then I had a script that I had always been working on to kind of pay homage to my martial arts childhood and the movies that I loved. And I always felt like a too cultured story, if that makes sense, in terms of like it didn't feel like a story that could be set straight up in Vietnam or Asia, but it felt like it had to be in a immigrant type of setting, in an American setting, particularly for me. So that's what led me to make The Paper Tigers.
Describe the story of The Paper Tigers.
The Paper Tigers is about these three kung fu classmates who grew up together, training together under the eyes of their master, their Sifu. But they happen to grow up and go their separate ways. As life happens, life gets in the way, and they grow up and grow apart from each other, and they find themselves estranged until one day they find out their master is killed mysteriously, and they have to come back together and find out what happened and perhaps avenge their master. Except this time they're older, they're out of shape, they have kids, they have jobs, they have wives. The way we like to say it is like imagine if you had to fight a death match tonight, but you have to go pick up your kid from football or soccer.
The film has a lot of kung fu in it, but is it a kung fu film?
Well, I mean, that's I leave that to experts such as yourself to define. I do think it features martial arts and it features kung fu and it features kung fu values and morals, if you will. So in that it's speech featuring that world. Whether the characters feel like they actually believe in it or not, that's the journey that we take with them in the story, and whether they actually seem to actually find value in it and think it's important for them in their lives. So. It's to me, I see think it's more a story about that and kind of finding whether kung fu has merit in their lives.
It certainly has a lot of value add to the film in terms of the discussions about honor and brotherhood and also parental responsibility. Now, you've mixed these wonderful themes with comedy, with the action. I was really taken by how well blended all these themes are. So I'd like to know how long it took you to write the screenplay and what the process was like transforming, a bag of ideas and intentions into what is a pretty disciplined story.
Mm. Well, I've been at this. It's an independent film, and I think like many other independent films, it takes a long time, and our story is no different in terms of making the film. It took many, many years to get this off the ground, and we eventually had to find the support of our family and our community and just the people around us as opposed to the Hollywood studios. So this was very much, a grassroots effort to raise the money and make this film. So the writing itself was kind of the front end. So it took about I would say about 4 years because I was in and out. As I mentioned, I was working in Vietnam uh, between projects, and I was just finding some time to write here and there. And eventually it came to the point where it just required a final polish. So I would say maybe about over the span of 4 years it took to write the script, and after that it pretty much stayed the same. We didn't take many studio notes or anything. It just felt like it was the right script to do. I'm a bit of an old school person. The script is the thing, the play is the thing. So there's not much more to kind of like really revise and change. But we also invited a lot of improvisation from the actors and to give it their own spin as well. So it's a bit fluid, but it's also at a point when the structure is kind of set. You kind of there's not really any more need to tinker.
Now, I know that you've done quite a few short films. The film is your first feature as a director. It is very, very well directed. Are you hiding a co-director somewhere? Did you have did you have a really experienced director hidden in the shadows? What accounts for how slick the film is?
Um, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure where I could take that. I guess, you have the movie gods looking over you, hopefully. Everything that I kind of grew up learning and soaking in from other filmmakers and influences like that. I always, even from when I was editing, I always had the Ten Commandments of Billy Wilder. I'm not sure if you're might be familiar with that, but he wrote out kind of these Ten Commandments of what a film should be, and such as just kind of like cutting to the chase, and then once you kind of finish the story, you're done. Just stuff like that. And I always kind of like keep that in the back of my mind, and I don't think you can go too wrong if you follow Billy Wilder's advice.
Now, I want to just ask you about two of the main themes in the film. One of them is the theme of reconstituting a withered brotherhood, the three main guys. Can you tell me where that comes from? What, I guess, inspired you? What drove you to make that one of the central themes of the film?
Yeah, well, I think working from the outside in, obviously martial arts films do have, a major sense of brotherhood and just a sense of family and just the loyalties the ties that bind that come out of that. I think for me was trying to look at that, but also trying to understand what that meant for me in this world. And like I said, it's being caught between two cultures where sometimes, you are encouraged to look out for yourself and look out for number one because we're Americans. But I think there's, you're always tugged and pulled between, the loyalties and that you owe to family and what they owe to you. So that kind of lives within you at a certain point, and you kind of feel that conflict. I think what was also interesting was also, the people that you could spend so much time with at a certain stage of your life. I mean, certain friends that you might see them every day, every waking hour, because you're either practicing kung fu or you're doing films or just stuff like that. And then there's sometimes a bittersweetness when sometimes life circumstances change and you don't see them to the same degree or at all. And that always feels tragic to me. So I always felt like that's an interesting thing to put and or explore, in a story like this, and the reconstituting, as you say, and kind of like it's in a lot of ways it's fun because you get back together and it's very easy with each other, with people for a long time, and there's an easiness to it, but also there's a bit of weariness because there are many years between you, and just that interesting mix of emotions. It's a funny thing, and that's something that I really kind of wanted to work with the actors with as well, and just kind of like building up that imagined history for the actors, because they had just met each other, for this movie. It's not like they were friends with each other, and how do we kind of recreate or reconstitute that in the performance as well? Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of ways to kind of look at that.
Well, I have to say that it works very well, and the chemistry between the guys was either genuinely there on the set, or you just are a really great editor and just cut it in. What was the case?
You can't make something out of nothing. So as an editor or any, like, you have to have it on the screen. So I think for them it was very genuine, the actors, And I could tell because even when we had them come in on the rehearsals or kind of the first time meeting each other, it kind of took a while maybe to warm up. But I think once they started opening, they already started talking amongst themselves, like without me, like they were already starting to find relationships and find histories with each other. And even they're in LA, and we shot this film in Seattle. So actually, when we had brought them up to Seattle, they were at the same hotel together, and you know, if you know the ins and outs of filmmaking, sometimes that could go horribly wrong if they don't like each other and they're living in the same space and they're working in the same space. But fortunately, they actually did like each other. And on their days off or their times off, they would gather each other, from each other's rooms and start going rehearsing and going over pages and studying and discussing on their own time, which is, that goes above and beyond, anything that we would have asked and expected of them. But I think that shows that's a testament to the work that they put in as far as the performances. So I think that's a huge part of what they did, and it just kind of we were just lucky on all levels that they took to the script and they liked each other and they wanted to put their best selves into it.
Now, the other main theme I wanted you to unpack a little bit was what I call the theme of qualified pacifism. The relationship between the father and the son, I think, is very well drawn, and he is advising his son to avoid fights, to always walk away. But ultimately, he does say, at some point, if you get pushed and bullied, you have got to raise your fist and hit back. Did you get any trouble for saying that?
Well, I think we had several different versions of the script, or the several different versions of the edit with the script, and we were just trying to find that right balance because it is tricky and how to qualify pacifism, but also qualify defense and what that means. Especially, I think martial arts is a very old school. It's a very those values are from a different time, and how do we find still value in that now? And I think that's the challenge. And it's also kind of a wrestling that I have within myself, because it's funny when you're a kid studying martial arts and they show you how to rip, tear, punch, and kick someone, and they say, "But don't do it. Don't do." It's a very confusing thing to teach a child that in a lot of ways, because like you just gave me all the tools to do the things that can damage someone, but then you're saying stop or don't use it. So and then especially when you're a kid who feels their power and feels is very full of piss and vinegar. It's kind of a funny thing. So that's kind of the challenge that what is fatherhood, or what is raising a child in this world and trying to teach him these lessons while not being a pushover, but not being a bully. So what does that all mean? So I think that's kind of like a process of discovery as well, for us in the edit, and trying to really understand what that all means.
Are you aware that the theme that you have in the film of looking the other way, avoiding a fight, but ultimately having to face your adversary, is actually honouring a tradition in American film about the bully theme? There have been quite a number of really good films that deal with bullying. I'm not just thinking of The Karate Kid, which is probably the most famous example, but even films like My Bodyguard, which is an old film, deals with the same thing in that, you hold back, but eventually, if you just get pushed into a corner, you've got to strike, and strike with intent. Were you aware of this history of American bully films?
I wouldn't say I'm aware of the American history. Let's put it this way. I think if you see the film and hear it, we did play a lot with some Western themes, meaning the American Western type of thing into the score and to the soundtrack, because I think there's also a connection there, not only because there's a dueling thing and the kind of the gunslinging elements of these guys challenging and fighting each other. Yeah, that's that. But also I think it harkens back to kind of the ideals of the old American West, or whatever ideals that way, as problematic as it is when we look back on it. But there are certain ideals about when you're out in the West to defend yourself and take care of yourself, because you just have to, and it's a matter of survival, but also a matter of honor, and also defending against anyone that's pillaging the village and stuff like that. So, that's I think the Kung Fu world is very much similar to kind of that cowboy American West ethos. So uh, I think that's, maybe just kind of thematically or just kind of like pulling back from the music is what we were, if would show that we're a little aware, I guess, or trying to pull from that emotion.
And here we have an example of the blending of the cultures, because when you say that, one thinks of High Noon, one also thinks of the Magnificent Seven, which of course is based on Seven Samurai. So they've got East and West blending in terms of this theme of hitting back at your oppressor.
Exactly.
I did just want to raise one critical observation I had of the film, and that is maybe it's 10 minutes longer than it needs to be. Without losing any of the main story points, I'm wondering whether the father son thing, the whole bully theme, could have been introduced stronger a lot earlier to dial that up, and maybe to skip over some of the test fighting scenes where they're in that school and they have the series of fights. The fighting is so well staged that you want to see a lot of good fighting, but just wondering whether that might have accounted for the film being maybe a bit long. What do you think of that observation?
Um, I think, I guess to each their own taste. I think for us, we did keep an eye on how to make this thing feel like it was flowing and on time. And, if we were to look at kind of the longer assembly and stuff like that, we did make many significant trims to get to the length that we have. I think there was some time during one of the uh, versions, I guess, my editor and I, Chris Christensen, we did what we called an evisceration cut. Because I think sometimes when you kind of trim and pull back, you don't really know how far you can pull back. I think that's what you might be getting at. So we did try to just chop and clear out, any extraneous felt that could be felt as extraneous. And I think we maybe got it down to, I want to say like 90 minutes. That was one of the versions, and it definitely felt like there were things that, okay, that's interesting. We could have tightened up, and then we ended up flowing that back into the next version of the cut. But there's definitely things where it felt like it was things were missing, and it felt like, yeah, we had the bare bones. You felt like there was the action points, and there's that, but it almost felt like it was too brisk.
Mm.
I think the challenge when you talk about tone and kind of weaving all these things, if you skip over certain tones too quickly, it feels like you haven't you haven't set your footing yet. And I think there's something about setting footing in a space. In It's okay, here there's a little humorous, here it's a little more serious, and if you skip over it too much, then it feels a little even more schizophrenic than you would want it to. So there's something about simmering in a tone before you kind of shift into the next one. And I don't know, it's just kind of it's a intuitional thing, and yeah, I mean, I think for us the length makes sense, and it makes as far as the flow from one movement to another.
In fairness, having just made that point about maybe the film being a bit long, I did enjoy the air in the film, the space in the film where you developed the relationship with the son, and where you took a bit of time to just have the guys chatting and interacting. So while I said that, I've also got to acknowledge that it seems to at least play to the characters, and it does help develop the film in the comedy drama space. Now, mate, what are your influences, not just in martial arts, but in comedy?
Yeah, I mean, of course, Billy Wilder. I think, if we're talking the master of transcending genres, I think, his work is second to none. Comedy more specifically, recently, of course, I love Taika Waititi and kind of his work, and again, kind of very similar kind of genre. Um, it doesn't When we say mashup, it doesn't feel right for Taika. Like Taika feels like it's of a world, and it kind of captures the highs and lows and the pathos and humors of life. So to me, it feels like it's real, it's truthful. You know, it's not a question of realism. It's whether it's truthful or not. So that's what I like. Edgar Wright, huge fan of Shaun of the Dead. Again, very similar kind of action, horror, comedy, romance, and just kind of those elements. And of course, the silence. I mean, Buster Keaton is kind of my guy on that one.
What's your ambition with the film?
Well, as a politician, I say, what can the film do for the world? I think what we obviously want to do is it's entertain, and it's a for us, feels like a crowd pleaser, and it's definitely something that audiences should be able to watch together in the hallowed dark room. So of course, a theatrical experience would be something that we would love to have. Also, just we haven't had that experience to be in the room with the audience yet. We've been, like I said, we've been all virtual so far, but it would just to be able to kind of lift people's spirits, and especially now, obviously, with all the things that are going on, it just seems the little things that we can do. There's great value in entertainment for entertainment's sake.
And how is the film travelling? It's been to a few festivals. It's been getting some very, very good write-ups.
Yes, so we world premiere at Fantasia, and we'll be doing our U.S. premieres among some festivals here in the U.S. that'll be streaming here virtually. So they'll be at the LA Asian Pacific Film Festival, and then the New York Asian American International Film Festival, and a couple more festivals coming up in the U.S. that are streaming. And then we'll have Busan International at the end of October, and that one is physical so far, fingers crossed. But that will be at their amazing cinema center.
Bao, have you got a distribution deal yet?
Well, hopefully, we'll have a good festival run, and we'll be have good people who might be interested, and hopefully we'll get some good news out of all that.
I think it's fitting to pay tribute to John Nolan, your first assistant director. And I just thought maybe the best way to do that is to firstly just explain the importance of what a first assistant director has on a film set, and then specifically just talk to John Nolan and the kind of job that he did.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for making the time for that. John Nolan was our first assistant director, and in kind of layman's terms, I guess the first assistant director is could be considered the coordinator, or kind of the joint chief of staffs, if you will, of just coordinating between departments and scheduling and making sure the trucks land on time. So very much of coordination, scheduling, laying down the tracks ahead of us, because on an independent film especially, it's like a train that's just barreling, and you hope that there's some track ahead of you, and that's the job of the first AD, and that department is just making sure that there's work to be done, and then that when we all land, we're all have everything that we need. So indispensable, especially and on an action film when there's so many moving parts, you have to kind of coordinate between the action department and kind of the drama and all that stuff, and just kind of do that. So we threw many challenges to John Nolan's way, being logistic or budget, on a very low budget, schedule, not a lot of time, and all that. But he handled it all with a plum, just in the sense that just made the trains move on time. And in fact, when you don't, when things are moving and you don't see problems, then that means he's done his job. It's one of those type of invisible effects that a great first AD can do on a film. But also on the day, just being the best cheerleader for us, and just making sure that we're all, got what we need, even just the creature comforts of making it through the day for the actors and the crew, and just making sure we had everything. And that was, those are all things that kind of go a long way in terms of making a happy set, and a happy set makes a happy film. I'm not a big believer in, high dysfunction or high what do you call high drama to make good drama on film. I think a nice, relaxed, professional, serious set, but also one that can have fun, is very important to and conducive to good filmmaking.
And at this time when everyone is talking about how COVID-19 is affecting them, affecting their businesses, affecting their work life, in the case of John Nolan, you have a very, I guess, sad and very poignant story of how he was taken by the virus.
Yes, so unfortunately, we had shot this film last year in 2019 summer, and he's from Texas. It's a great big old state here in the United States. And I guess he went back to work on a commercial or something, and unfortunately he contracted COVID, and succumbed pretty shortly thereafter. I think he had to go to the hospital soon after. So this was called all came to us in dispatches, on Facebook, on social media, through his family or his close friends. So we kind of got different updates through that. But in that time we were in post production. We were getting news of our world premiere, and we're getting ready. So it was a very bittersweet and kind of thing to kind of go through, especially that he didn't get a chance to see the film himself. So that was the kind of big hope that we were, we all have a great big cast and crew screening, and we'd all celebrate and enjoy the fruits of our hard work.
Well, again, my very deep condolences for that. Very,
Thank
very
you.
sad. Now, can you just, with the production of the film, can you just give me some nuts and bolts about uh, how long it actually took to get up, how you got it up, what it cost, and how you got the money? If you used crowdfunding and investors and so on, did you go to a studio? Can you just unpack that little bundle of questions I've
Oh,
crammed
yeah.
in there for you?
Get ready. Yeah, this Jack in the Box is just going to explode on you here. Um, Well, it is a low budget film, and we did go around to pitch to studios first, just because of studio support or just financial support. It felt like it could have a good home at a great studio, and if we got the right amount of money, we could, really, knock it out of the park. But unfortunately, there was many studios that were interested, but unfortunately, they had came with caveats such as changing the race of our lead characters, because our characters are two Asian Americans and one Black American, and they needed a white actor that they could have a box office buzz or whatever, and that's a very common note that comes down our way oftentimes for stories of underrepresented communities or people of color. So it's unfortunate that that became kind of the I guess the caveat as far as being able to, we'll make your movie, but change the race of your cast. So that was an easy no for us. And at that point, it just became a thing where we had to realize we had to do this ourselves. And like I said, it's just rolling up your sleeves and raising money among our families and friends and our other contacts in the community. So this was very much all grassroots. And we did do a Kickstarter, and we did a Kickstarter a couple years before the shooting, actually. And if you want to me roll back a little bit more, we actually shot the first portions of the film, where the heroes are younger, in the periods of the 80s and 90s. We actually shot that earlier on and separately from the main part of the production, partly because I wanted to get stuff in the can. I wanted to move things forward and try to get more things going, and then also we were able to use that as kind of a show reel or kind of a sizzle piece for potential future investors, and then for our Kickstarter. So we did this in very much starts and stops, and then just finding ways to kind of finish out and round out the rest of our funding to shoot the rest of the film, and we ended up doing that last year, and we spent about 30 days in production last year and getting the rest of the film done. And again, it was very much a community effort. We shot in the Chinatown, or what we would call the International District of Seattle here. And it was a community effort. The restaurateurs would come out and bring snacks for us, because also they saw Asian Americans making films in their community, and it was very much hometown boys doing good and doing something. So we definitely felt the love with our community and the people that supported us. So again, that was we they lifted us up in that sense.
Uh,
And then we started editing, and here we are.
Are you going to tell me how much the film cost?
I won't be able to, sir. Yeah, we'll have to maybe in the Wikipedia later on.
No
But it
problem.
definitely not the amount that the studios offered us. So we it became the point of like, we're gonna do this for less, and on our terms.
And just very quickly, shooting in Seattle, what was the situation with permits? Did the city make you pay for permission to shoot in the city?
Well, the city of Seattle itself is very supportive of film, and if you we're situated a little bit south of Vancouver, Canada, and there's a lot of film productions that we actually get outcompeted and outbid by up in Canada because they have a great industry up there and also a really good, healthy film incentive program, right? So, but for us, we don't have those amenities, but at least the city itself, tries to bend over backwards and do what they can in supporting films. So the permitting actually was very much the easy part, and their permitting and all the getting the coordinations and logistics from the city itself was very much an easy thing to do because they were all behind in supporting our film.
Now, I just want to just go.
As opposed to LA, right? If you go to LA, they'll charge you for everything.
Yeah,
It's a much different situation.
so the Seattle City Council didn't try to extract a lot of money from you for permits and so on.
No, they were great. It's actually, 25 US dollars for a permit, I think a day, and I think it was pretty very flat fee and very simple, very straightforward.
Now, mate, I just for a moment want to return to the issue of casting that you said and the caveat that studios made with you regarding the racial mix of the film. Now, I'm going to be very careful how I word this because I completely respect the integrity of saying we are not going to change the ethnic mix of our cast because that is the vision that we have and that's what we want to go with. That said, I do know that some independent filmmakers would look at a deal like that and would probably consider seriously if it was a matter of changing one cast member in order to get studio backing, putting in a big name actor, whoever it is. But the idea of making that deal on the understanding that it doesn't actually hurt the central concept of the film, some independent filmmakers, with their hands on their heart and with the same claim to artistic integrity, would go for a deal like that. What say you?
Well, I think everybody has their own prerogative. I think it's a big enough world. I think for us, obviously, like you said, we kind of stuck by our guns and wanting to do it. I think the bigger issue is that it becomes a vicious cycle because basically the studio's logic, and this is kind of like where we would argue about systemic structures of prejudice and whatnot, but their thinking is like, well, there are no Asian American stars, bankable stars, and we need bankable stars to make fund and bankroll this film. So that's the catch 22. If you're not willing to cast and support and build up stars that are Asian American or Black American or any ethnicity that's not white, then you just will never have any stars that reach that bankable level. Like it's just kind of the cycle that you have to break. So at some point, we have to put it on our shoulders as independent filmmakers to take that risk, even if it means doing it for much less or whatnot, to kind of like elevate and portray and expose and give more visibility to the talent of color. And I point, stars don't come out of vacuums either. I point to, everyone that you would see now that making, say, Marvel movies, and I'm not saying that's the benchmark of success or whatever, but it's a visible example. But Brie Larson, started out in Short Term 12. Michael B. Jordan, started in independent films. Like all these stars, had to start somewhere, and it usually is independent film. So the buck stops with us, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately. But we're the ones that create, people who are visible and actually showcase talent that big studios would always overlook.
Segueing from what you just said, I think there might be a very strong argument that Asian representation in American mainstream film is actually quite strong. And if anything, it's on the rise. What do you think of that? What's your perspective? Do you agree with that?
I think it depends on how we define Asian representation or representation of anybody. Is it just having more faces of color and on the screen, or um, is actually the script and the story being told with an authentic perspective and view of portraying these communities and whatnot? And is it also the people behind the scenes, whether it's the directors or the producers, that are authentically showing stuff? So I mean, Yeah, I mean, this is, touches on kind of the pushback that we had even among our own community because they were saying, well, how come you're making a martial arts film? It's like you're almost setting us back. All the progress that we've made with non-martial arts roles and more progressive stories, then how come you're doing this? It seems like you're setting us back because for so many years it's been Bruce Lee or it's been henchmen, Asian gangsters, Asian triads, in these Law and Order episodes or these, whatever these U.S. based type of stories, and then we're often the villains or kind of the side characters. So it's also a question of like, yeah, you could have 100 henchmen. So if you're counting the head count, yes, you've just casted, 100 Asian Americans, but are those roles meaningful, or are those roles in any way kind of moving any type of or shedding any more light on perspectives and stories that are authentically our own? So that's the question. We can argue a numbers game, but it's a question of values as well, and whether we're perpetuating certain stereotypes or not.
One of the really enjoyable things about your film is that the main character is just in a normal domestic setting, and you consciously did not make a big issue of their racial background. In fact, you joke about it when the teaching instructor is talking. He's speaking in it's Chinese, or he's speaking it,
Yeah.
and they say, "Sorry, speak English. We don't understand what he's saying." You're consciously, you're consciously very unself-conscious about the issue of race and ethnicity in the film, and you are to be commended, I think, for that, because I think that is a very intelligent, progressive step forward in terms of representing diversity. You represent them not as the other, but just as normal, whatever it is, middle American people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's kind of like what we weren't. I didn't expect to carry this, big representation flag and stuff, but because by the nature of the industry and its resistance, we had to kind of like, speak to it, but behind the scenes. But certainly in art and in the stories, it's ultimately about people and humans, and whether that it feels truthful or not. So, and I think that's kind of the challenge that we have, because I think some people say if you speak up about these issues, maybe that seeps into your art and it becomes preachy or becomes, all these things. But I think we can have both those types of conversations at the same time.
There wasn't anything at all preachy in your film. You did push I guess, the idea of being a person with honor and respecting your spouse, even if you're separated from them. So I don't think there was anything ethnically or racially or based in it. I don't think identity politics has affected you. And I mean that as a great compliment. Is that the case? You're not hypersensitive to these things in terms of your art?
Well, yeah, I think this kind of touches on bigger things that are maybe a little bit beyond my level of expertise and understanding. But I think in terms of just shedding light on disparities in hiring and casting, like I can speak to that in terms of like, we have to break that catch-22, like I was mentioning, in terms of just building up notable actors and stars in that kind of like very manufactured term, I guess. But also, just bringing up, notable actors that are from certain communities, and we can have that conversation. But also in the art in itself, how do you do it artfully and be able to kind of like, tell a story, but tell a story that has some type of core or something, spine in the middle that can convey some type of emotion, and do that, artfully. I think those are kind of two different things, um, you know, but we can have both those conversations, like I said.
The point surely, and it applies to everything, is that as long as anyone can relate to it, that's the important thing, that it's a universal theme. When you talk about the relationship between a man and a woman whose marriage has fallen down, and who's best responsible for their child, is not an Asian theme. It's not a European theme. It's not American or African, or that's something that everybody can relate to, and that surely is the point. That surely is the ultimate goal when talking about how do you represent people of different ethnicities or whatever on screen do as human. That's the answer, and I think that's what you've done in this film. That's just a
Yeah,
comment,
thank
mate.
you.
That's just a comment. I just thought I'd make that clear. Bao Tran, what is your view of this recent uh, Oscar diversity policy? Do you agree with it? Do you think it goes too far? Do you think that the sentiment is the important thing? Or do you agree with the idea of quotas?
Yeah, so I will plead a little bit of ignorance. We have been very busy in delivering this film and getting this kind of into the festival's hands. So we were, we literally finished the film. I think you had emailed me, but in that time we finished the film on the Tuesday before the Thursday opening night to the festival. So all of our, our hair was on fire for quite some time. I did see that announcement go out. I did see some chatter. I can't say I know too much about it or too specifically. I do kind of I have heard kind of what you had mentioned echoed throughout. I think my general first hot take, with that being said, is I think the academy is just one piece of the puzzle, and they're addressing certain things that they can within their structure of awards in itself. So I think it's not the end all be all, but if there's stuff that they can do, then great. If there's things that they can keep revising and figure out, then that's one thing as well. I think with the quotas and stuff, I think it's ultimately whether you want to win an Oscar or not. I mean, it really comes down to that. So if you want to win an Oscar, those are kind of the rules that you're gonna have to abide by. But that doesn't preclude like just making a good movie outside of awards. So I mean, that's just kind of like my general sense. Those when it gets a little too nitty gritty about certain policies between orgs and stuff, my eyes kind of glaze over a little bit about what all that is. I understand awards; they're important. I don't, at the end of the day, I just want to entertain people and have them enjoy the film. So the awards are kind of nice, but I don't think it's the end all be all.
I think one of the issues that people are having with that policy is that things are improving anyway. Things are actually improving in all these diversity areas. So producers and directors are much more aware of these issues, and it's being reflected in films. Mexican Americans, for instance, have nothing to complain about their level of representation of the Oscars. They have been ruling over the last several years. So I guess an argument is, or a point is, why push it? Why push something that's happening organically?
Yeah, I think the stuff that's happening in its own time, but also that I think there's issues about blind spots and whether there's kind of people who fall through the gaps in terms of hiring. I'm not sure if I can speak entirely to awards and all the kind of like the nitty gritty of what their policy is, but there are definitely blind spots in terms of hiring, because if you're used to just hiring your friends, and if your friends are typically all white, you know at what point does a new talent or a new person find their way into that opportunity? I think those are, and then if you say, oh well, I reached out and I called someone and I made a couple calls and we brought one person, and then we have challenges of tokenizing. Well, okay, so those are kind of like starting to unpack a lot of things. So they're gradually happening, but whether the question that it happens, in the time that it needs to happen or the speed that it needs to happen, then that's another thing. But yeah, there's just we can try so much, but then sometimes there's just blind spots that we're not aware of, and we kind of need some policy changes to actually be forced to see it.